A separate conditional use question.
Well, welcome you all to the Middleton City Hall. It's 7 o'clock, and I'm going to call the meeting of the Middleton Plan Commission Tuesday, June 11th, 2019 to order. And the first item is the roll call.
Commissioner Paulson,
Here.
Hubbard,
Here.
Farrar,
Yeah.
Murray,
Here.
Slattery,
Here.
and Berger.
Here.
Present.
And Dan Ramsey wasn't feeling well, so he won't be here. So Mike Slavish is our new member. Mike, do you want to say anything about yourself? or
No,
whatever?
just to apologize to the commission for missing my first two meetings. Had a graduation for my daughter, so, but happy to be here and look forward to contributing, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Can I close the door?
Sure you can. That L&O group, they're loud, loud bunch. Just kidding.
Okay.
Deal with
The
noise complaints.
first item is the minutes.
Move to approve the minutes of the last meeting.
Second.
All those in favor of approving the minutes of
I have
Plan Commission meeting, yes.
one comment in the minutes, one addition where it relates to the comments on the quarry expansion
Okay,
and the impacts. I'd like to note, in blasting as one of the items it was.
sting impacts, okay.
Okay, with those two changes, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So the motion passes. So, design review, item number 2 is design review for expansion of parking lot, Milton High School, 2100 Bristol Street.
And the
So,
applicant's here.
okay, so are we going to, he's going to make the presentation.
Can you scroll down to like the plan set?
I want to stop.
Okay, it should be about the second page of the plan set. Right there, there's the existing conditions and demolition plan.
Could you blow it up a little bit, or that's how far it will go?
I think it's gonna go.
Thank you. Okay, so you guys want to speak about it, make a presentation, whatever you want to do?
I'm not quite sure exactly what you want us to present. The high school is going to be moving forward this fall with an expansion of the high school. This is going to be the first phase, as the expansion's going to be, the building expansion's going to be over an existing parking lot. So they want to get ahead of it, have an existing, have a parking lot to handle the parking mildews, in addition to allowing construction staging parking as well.
I just wanted to add that the staff comments, the recommendation is for approval, but it should be conditioned on resolution of staff.
Anything? legal?
Eileen, can you remind us, we do a lot of design reviews of buildings and we're looking at exteriors. What is a design review of a parking lot?
The landscaping,
The landscaping,
stormwater
okay.
management, the layout itself.
So can you go to the next page is the actual new development.
Part of what we're approving is a gravel portion of the lot that will be used temporarily. Will you define what temporary means? Will it go away once the new building is there?
When the building is expanded and they start construction, this will eventually become all paved, and there is a plan for that to have parking there as well. It will get paved, they just don't want to pave it right now with construction equipment on it.
Okay. What will it be used for? Before, as the school's being built, what will the parking lot be used
So
for?
the paved portion will just be parking, and then the gravel will be for the construction, staging their equipment.
Eileen, do we need any handicap stalls in?
There have to be a certain number. I assume you've looked at, the designers looked at that. I didn't review it, Mark did, and I didn't ask that specific question, but it's prescribed by ADA, so
Okay.
I would think you have wherever you need to have them, in your whole parking lot, you have them, right?
Yep, for this phase, there won't have to be any. It will be, in the overall, we will definitely have them, and it'll be addressed.
In this phase, there won't have, is that possible, that they don't have any?
Well,
kind?
because I am assuming it's looked at as a whole. And
Yep.
again, I didn't review this specifically, but it typically says that they'd be the closest
To
to
the
an
building, yeah.
entrance. And so they have, several different parking lots. So I'm sure they meet the overall total, but that would be a requirement.
You're correct. Since they're not the building won't be expanded at this time, they're meeting it currently. The handicap parking is, on Bristol Street and also in the lot by where the pool is.
What is,
Eileen, do you have any idea how long the review by city would take? Because I noticed that the construction schedule calls for this to be initiated in June.
They're currently reviewing it. I think stormwater's being addressed. But it's not gonna take
Okay.
long. I just don't know that they've finished. There's an initial review that's been done, and I think those comments have been provided, maybe? Is that right, Sarah? I don't know.
I haven't seen any comments.
'Cause I see that you've included stormwater facilities, but what I'm hearing is the sizing perhaps is a key thing that's being reviewed, right? The
So the-
sizing and interaction between the elements.
Exactly. So what we did for the our stormwater approach for this was just to look at just the parking lot and meet new development since it exceeds the 20,000 square feet of new impervious. So the facilities you see right now, they're gonna meet new development requirements. And then we'll review the whole school on a whole when we come in the fall, because then at that time, it will be a mix of new and redevelopment.
Right, okay, thank you.
Where does the stormwater of the existing parking lot, right off Clark Street, where does that go?
The storm sewer in
Yeah,
Clark
is there
Street?
just a storm sewer?
There's just
Just
storm
right
se-
into the creek?
Yeah,
So there's not actually a retention basin?
no.
Okay.
So you'll be making a better situation because you'll have some treatment and.
Correct, yep.
And
Water
then,
quality treatment.
the existing parking lot will be removed at some point in time? No, that's gonna stay?
The existing parking lot, you can kind of see a portion of it in the lower right-hand corner. That's gonna be mostly building.
Right. I meant the stuff that's the Clark Street, that'll
That-
stay?
That's gonna remain, yeah.
what is
And I
the-
guess, just having kids in the school,
Right.
that kind of semi-private street always gets backed up when people are picking up.
Yep.
Are you concerned at all about during peak traffic times of traffic jams into the parking lot of?
During construction is what you're
Yeah, well,
kind of trying to
during-
get at.
Well, yeah.
That's a very good question, and I didn't think about it during construction, but we have a final plan that it's gonna be one-way direction. But it's something we should review for
Yeah.
during construction as that road is closed off.
Will there be a stop sign, into the parking lot onto Lee Street initially?
Yes.
What's the surface between the two parking lots? I see there's a sidewalk that it looks like is existing there, on the west side of the old parking lot, or the new parking lot. And then there's a line there. Will that be grass or will that also be concrete?
It'll be a grass buffer
Okay.
between the two parking lots, other than the sidewalk. The sidewalk, we're gonna keep there to have a connection between Clark Street School and the high school.
And then eventually, will you have a landscaping plan? or
There is a
what's-
landscape plan, it should be one of the last
There's-
pages.
okay. Can you bring that up to look at the trees?
There we go.
Okay. Thank you.
So it's kind of your traditional bumped-up curb with trees.
And why the-
And they'll be in this fall for the building.
I'll move approval subject to resolution of any comments from city staff.
Second.
any questions? So now, when would we see, and, we approve the concept, more detailed plans that would be coming soon, or?
This one is the final plan set.
This is-
The full high school plans will be coming this fall, September.
Okay. Any questions?
And
Mhm.
your
Yes, Kurt.
approval is conditional on stormwater, okay.
That's part of the staff comments.
That's part of the staff
That's-
comments.
Any other questions? Any other questions? Okay.
When do you start construction? Probably like next week?
Ideally next week. They would like it in place for the Good Neighbor Festival.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So the motion is for the conditional approval of the design review for expansion parking lot. All those in favor of that motion say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So the motion passes. All right.
Thank you.
Good start. Well, it's 7:10, so let's go to item number 3.
I move to set Tuesday, July 9th, 2019 at 7:15 as a public hearing for a conditional use permit to convert duplex to 2 zero-lot line parcels on Northbrook Drive.
Second?
Okay, this is a date for public hearing. Still any questions or comments? All those in favor of this setting the public hearing date say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So the motion passes unanimously.
And I just have to say one quick word about this ordering of the agenda. We had 5 things more on the agenda last week, but they got taken off because they weren't ready. So some of the things got bumped up so we could make sure that we had the public hearings, 7:15 and 7:30, just in case you're wondering why we have set a public hearing in the middle of the agenda. I was just trying to make up for
Give
what
us
we
something
took
to
off.
do, yeah.
That's right.
Well, I guess we can't take
We
6
can do
or
the
7.
SEH one, I think.
Yeah, we can do the SEH.
Okay, so let's go to item number 4. Recommendation to accept proposal from SEH for community campus planning services for downtown.
Or I'll move to approve?
You are on that commission, right?
Yes.
Great.
Okay, need a second.
Leave second.
Okay. All right, let's, the discussion begins. You want to tell us now, you had, you started with 6 proposals, then you interviewed 4.
Yeah,
and,
we interviewed 4 last week, and out of all of the proposals, this was the one that we picked, partially because of the components of the project, all of the components that we had submitted in terms of our discussion, the community center, the senior center, working through the library planning, all of those were included. They also had clear phases to their proposal. They proposed to engage all ages, both kids and seniors, throughout the public involvement process. And they had a thorough representation of the complexities of the site as they were presenting. They also brought a model in showing that they were prepared and ready for public involvement. So that was sort of a fun thing that they had brought in as a display. So those were some of the reasons why we decided that they had proposed something that we could support.
So I also looked at, they had done several different projects at other places in Minneapolis, Marshfield, Milwaukee, I guess Marshalltown, so,
My hometown.
which looked impressive, but without details, it's hard to tell. So any questions or any comments either to Jennifer or just in general?
Couple comments and questions. First of all, I thought the proposal was very good. I was impressed with the proposal. Even more so, I was impressed with the evaluation that was done, so good work by your committee. A couple questions. Did we check on anything about the references about this group working together as a team? I know there are reference checks on individuals.
Scroll down.
What about them as a team?
We had asked them that they answer a few questions during their presentation, and I believe this firm did talk
Team
about the teamwork that they had done prior to this. If I'm not misunderstanding the project, they had worked in the Appleton project, different parts of it. Epson Ewan worked on that. And then SEH had talked about some of the components that they had worked on as well.
Good. And then, I guess a related question, this pertains more to the city's procurement process. My question is, by working on this part of the plan development, does that restrict their ability to work further down the line? I was thinking,
That'll be a
especially with
separate
Findorf
process,
being involved
yeah.
this early, I didn't know if that at all affected their ability to participate in later phases. Sometimes you have to choose between phases of a project.
I wouldn't think it does, because but that's that's a question maybe as we go down the road, but I don't see anything that would,
Right, the scope of work is the planning and the plan preparation. It's not
right.
any detailed engineering.
And there'll be a whole nother process
Right.
for that.
And assuming they'll want to compete for that as well, the design-build
Yeah.
stuff.
That's a good question.
Yeah, they probably would have an advantage, I imagine, but what do you think, Matt? Is there any issues there?
Well, like I said, I not as I sit here now, I don't see any obvious reason why they can't.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Yeah, I thought that proposal looks good, and I did get to talk to them a little bit when they were making the presentation, so, okay.
Eileen? Can you let
Yes.
the records reflect, I'm going to abstain from voting on this because Darren Fortney, one of the project leads, is my neighbor. So.
Okay, all right. So, with Kurt abstaining, all those in favor of the motion
I
say.
guess I should say, Paul Reislager, who is one of the leads, is also my neighbor, but I don't have any relationship with Paul in terms of a professional,
I've sent a number of students to work for him, so it's,
okay. So I feel comfortable, but okay.
Yeah, I would think that's fine.
Okay, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So the motion passes. All right, at 7:15, actually 7:17. So I'm going to go ahead and open the public hearing for proposed zoning ordinance amendment regarding an ordinance relating to time period for approval of specific implementation plan. So, Aline, you want to say what it is?
And answer this if I leave something out, but this is because state law changed, and so, our ordinance right now requires that an SIP be approved within a year of a GIP being approved for a planned development district. A lot of times we'll have projects, because they just take longer, come in and ask for more time. This state law now allows 5 years for a property owner that's gotten a rezoning to a PDD based on a general implementation plan, to have 5 years for the specific implementation plan to be approved. So it's,
So it's more housekeeping.
yeah, we have to change it. 'Cause that's-
Okay,
we keep having to update our ordinances
I
based
know.
on
yeah.
change in state law, and I suspect when this budget comes through, we'll have more of them.
Well, anybody wants to speak either in favor or against it? Anybody wants to speak in favor or against? All right, so if there's no one here to speak, I'm going to close this hearing. And it's still not 7:30, so we can go to item number 5, I suppose, right?
That's here for that one as well. if there's
All right,
questions.
that makes, we go to item number 5. Extraterritorial certified survey map, CSM, to create 4 residential lots. Hubbard Trust, 4577 and 4601 Evergreen Road in the town of Middleton.
I will recuse myself from discussion on this.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Lee. Okay, so who's going to start? Matt or Aline or?
I can do it if you, or, I'll do
But
it.
the applicant's attorney is here as well.
Yes. Right. Well, probably. There was a comment at the special meeting where it was, this CSM was denied based on the utility, that if a private restriction were placed on the property, that might negate the utility issue, or concern. And so the applicant now is requesting approval with the provision that they would place a deed restriction for only a single-family structure on each of the 2 lots that are being created. The way I wrote the staff comments was that that would be in favor of the city, or to the benefit of the city, so if any of the property were ever annexed, that could potentially be lifted by the city or released by it at the request of a property owner. And so that would negate the utility issue, well, not, it negates the developability, not the utility, because we still have the driveway, but. And Matt, did I leave anything out or explain okay? Maybe not?
No, yeah, I mean, that's why it is back. The property owner before indicated they couldn't commit to any sort of deed restriction, and now they can. And so they wanted to bring it back to see, discuss that further, and see if that changes the committee's mind with regard to approval of the CSM. And I guess the only other question then would be just to fine tune exactly what we would want such a deed restriction to say. I mean, I think what I understand would be, restricting development of lot to single-family residential structures. I would assume we want to include the ability to have, structures accessory to residential structures, but I think, as Eileen and I discussed, presuming we understand the thrust of the proposal and what the committee was looking for in terms of a deed restriction, rather than referring to use, because, perhaps somebody wants to use this as open space or to have some kind of park use to it. So I think it makes more sense to refer to the restriction, restricting the building of structures to single-family and accessory, structures accessory to single-family uses.
So Matt, you're using the plural, but my understanding is that the intent of the deed restriction would be to limit each lot to one single-family house plus any not
yeah,
two single-family houses, which would,
Correct.
which might be permissible under a city ordinance if it annexed, so it's,
Right.
yeah. Is that, you're
That's
limited?
correct. So what we're proposing is lots 1 and 3, which are the undeveloped lots, 2 has a home on it already, as does 4, that those lots will be restricted to one single-family residence, and then whatever accessory buildings would be permitted with respect to that single-family residence, garage, shed, whatever.
Would the deed restriction prohibit future subdivision?
We have no problem with that if that's something that is desirable. So I think what originally we talked about was this 1 home per lot. We're fine with that. But if it's 1 home per lot and then not further subdivision, there's not an issue with agreeing to that.
My question was actually moving in the other direction, which is, again, so to kind of rehash, I think one of our concerns was that the location of the driveway and the configuration of the lots seemed to preclude any future developability or utility of Lot 1 if that would to annex into the city. But as we spoke privately, and as I wrote in a memo to Eileen, a private law device like a deed restriction, in essence, overrides that ability, because our concern from a city standpoint with an extraterritorial CSM is if the parcel eventually wants to come into the city and it's configured or zoned in a certain way that makes it really not a city-type use, then that poses problems down the road.
Right.
But a deed restriction limiting to a single-family house would most likely mean that the parcel couldn't, in that configuration, enter into the city or annex into the city without. So when Eileen says that the deed restriction should be written to the benefit of the city, can you flesh that out a little more? That we would have the right to.
Well, I would say, I mean, if it is written that way, and maybe writing it that way doesn't meet your purposes, but if it is written that way, that it's deed restriction that is for the benefit of the city, and I mean, then the city would have the ability to eliminated. But if it's a deed restriction, for instance, that is just for the benefit of the proper, like, as if this were a little development, and that was kind of like the restrictive covenants for this development, you know, and the city didn't have any say over whether or not the deed restriction would be or could be lifted. Maybe that's more in line of what, you know, meeting your concern.
Well, let me, I know that we don't want to do a hypothetical, but suppose someone buys this parcel in 10 years and thinks that they want to put like a small lot subdivision, 8 to 12, kind of small, single-family houses. That's a housing demand that's out there. People have done it on 1-acre parcels. And obviously you would need public water and sewer, so they'd have to annex to the city. You'd have access would be tough. Would this deed restriction prohibit the future landowner from doing that?
Well, again, it depends on who has the power to release the restriction, in whose favor it runs, and whether those persons or person would release that for that purpose.
So if the deed restriction ran in favor of the current landowner, then he or his successors would have to release it.
Right, so the owner of, I mean, if it's just for lots 1 and 3, and we're talking about lot 1, so if the owner of lot 3 has to agree, then that would be, as far as the deed restriction is concerned, owners of lot 3 would have to agree to release the restriction. If it's just in favor of the city, then the city decides whether or not that restriction can be released.
Could it be both?
Or it could be both, yeah.
And the only-
And I think that's what we were anticipating. I don't
Yeah.
think we're married to an idea there, but I think what we thought, I mean, from the city's perspective, you know, we could say we were going to impose this restriction, do it, and then release it if the city is not a party to it. So we understand why the city would want that, but I think the desire is to maintain the lots with the single-family homes and have the other owners of the CSM be able to weigh in on that. But again, we're not married to that, but that seems to make logical sense based on what we're proposing to do here.
And I think the issue is the city's future interest in properties near the city boundary is that we avoid excessively large lots that lock us into a very large rural suburban,
Right.
rather than, if it comes into the city, it should be developable at urban-type densities with urban services.
I guess what I was envisioning and would like to recommend is that there be the deed restriction for lot 1 and lot 3 somewhat independently, so that both property owners don't have to agree, because we know how hard that can be, but then to the benefit of the city, so that if that ever happened and it was annexed and some property owner wanted to, the city could say, sure, we agree with that and we will release it, you know. Anyway, that's what I was envisioning when I wrote the comments. So my recommendation was approval of the CSM, subject to the city attorney approving both the cross-access easements for the driveway and the deed restriction.
So are you saying, Eileen, if it were to come into the city, right, if it were to be annexed, and then you would have the right to release it,
The property
and,
owner asked us to.
and they could then develop it in accordance with code?
City code.
Right, city ordinances, yes.
But with the understanding that that driveway will have already been there.
Right, yeah, no, I just wanted to make sure I understood that what she's talking about is a circumstance where it gets annexed in,
And I think, to be honest, if this deed restriction goes through and the CSM goes through, the probability it'll be annexed in is pretty low.
right,
To be annexed in for development purposes.
Right.
Would be pretty low, just because it becomes hard to do. So,
Why
can I
would-
make that motion to what Eileen just said? But I would add that the deed restriction is to the favor of the city.
Those would be two separate basically independent deed.
Deed restrictions on 1 and 3, is that?
I think the intent was to try to keep it so that the neighbors could also weigh in on it, but if you're saying that that's not acceptable, then we're gonna have to just live with that. I mean, I think, you know, technically people are agreeing to bind their property in a way they wouldn't otherwise have to. But if that's the requirement, then I think we're just gonna have to move forward with that.
Wouldn't 2 be in that discussion?
This is
It's already developed. So 2 and 4 are already developed. The concern was the development of the properties.
Two, I
Is
mean,
it-
the existing house, I mean, this is a new lot, it's a different lot being created. I mean, I don't know that, I mean, it does seem reasonable to me that maybe all 3 should be in, but all 3 should, you know, for lot 1 to do something different, well, lot 2 and 3 should agree to it and vice versa, is like a restrictive covenant for a lot of other developments.
Yeah.
If I, as lot 1 owner, have to have my property deed restricted to a certain use, while the other lots created at the time of my lots, at least it seems reasonable that they be subject to those same things, and, you know, we all have to agree, or we all don't agree that any one of those lots would be developed for any other purpose.
So in essence, the owner of the parent parcel puts a restriction that applies to all the daughter
Effectively,
parcels.
yes.
Yeah, in a subdivision.
That is a way, but that seems to be a reasonable way, rather than each individual, and then each individual just gets to decide with the city about what's gonna happen, because then that's not probably too terribly different than just approving the CSM. Because the city still could decide to annex or decide not to annex. It can decide to allow further development. You know, we obviously have to follow some rules within our ordinances, but there's still a great deal of discretion. Whereas if you add to that deed restriction, that not only the city would have to approve the release of the restriction, but also, you know, have that reciprocal approval for each of the property owners within this CSM, that to me at least seems to be more consistent with what I understand to be the purpose of this restriction. It creates a private covenant that makes it less likely to have to
Right.
put to some other use.
Yeah, it's, my understanding is it's a private law device imposed by the person who owns the parcel now,
Right.
which in essence binds future owners who, when they acquire their parcel, do so with full awareness of the restrictions. And at some point in time, if we're looking at a parcel and we're saying, well, it's got a private restriction on it that will limit its development, then from a city's perspective, the CSM is fine, our objections are moot, and then whatever the current landowner wants in terms of the restrictions seems fine with us.
Right, and
Does that make sense?
And if the landowners come, you know, in the future, if anybody has a desire to do anything different, well, first of all, there'd probably no need to come to us at all unless and until the other 2 property owners agree, and then they can come to us and talk about something different, I guess, but.
And I think, I mean, what we would provide is that you can't unreasonably withhold your consent or condition your consent or delay your consent to try to get at requiring people to be cooperative. It's still a restriction. It still burdens and benefits the properties. But I think the goal is to create something functional that will work to address this issue and then also be workable moving forward so people aren't unreasonably bound by this restriction.
And from my perspective, people put restrictions and covenants and easements on their property all the time, and it only becomes a city issue if it kind of thwarts the intention of our comprehensive plan about a future parcel perhaps annexing. But that objection, as I told you, it seems moot now because if there's a restrictive covenant, it doesn't matter, so. Do you want to read the motion so we can know what we're voting on?
Well, moved by Paulson to approve, subject to the city attorney approval of the access easements and deed restrictions to the benefit of the city.
On future
On
lots
all three-
1,
On 3 parcels.
1 and 3.
1 through 3. I think.
I'm not
Or
sure we
did you
need
just-
2.
Just 1 and 2, or 1 and 2?
Since 2 is existing.
Can I ask a clarifying question on that? Does the term residential imply R1 zoning later?
That's a good question.
I mean,
Well, it doesn't matter because the property will be zoned whatever, right now I think it's A1.
It's in the town.
Yep. And so the residential limit, the deed restriction will control what can actually be built, and the zoning will be what the zoning is. I mean, you're right, if there's a conflict, if the zoning were to change to M1, you wouldn't be able to build a residential house there, and then you would have a conflict. But I don't think that, I don't think we're anticipating that that's likely at this point.
It'll stay in the town, so it'll be zoned A1, which allows one house,
Right.
and the lot sizes.
Correct.
Actually, it could have 3 building sites, I think, in the current zoning in the county, I think.
There's 2 building sites, but only one house allowed.
There's a third one that didn't get identified on the CSM.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
for lot 3, or lot 1.
When we were out there, we saw it.
My question would be, would any use be allowed in the residential houses, like daycares or other things like that?
So I think we're restricting development. We're not going to restrict use, meaning if the code allowed it, you would be able to have a daycare or an accessory, whatever. We're going to keep the zoning consistent. And I think, right, Matt, the intention is to limit what actually gets constructed, to make it only a single-family home with
But
whatever.
open space use could be allowed.
Oh, yes, definitely. We're not going to forbid, I think that's where Matt was going. We're not going to.
Otherwise, whatever use the property gets put to will be governed by zoning.
Zoning.
That's why
Right.
I just wanted to talk about just what
Okay.
physical structure.
Right.
it
Structure.
Right,
Okay.
right. And it,
means the property is put.
so if you wanted to create a conservancy or do something like that, right, that would be allowable because you wouldn't be building anything. It's really about what you're going to be allowed to build on this lot, not trying to restrict the uses of it, which is what we understood the concern was.
Right.
So in this case, deed is in favor of the city, and also on 3 lots, they have to agree with
That's a
it.
question, I don't think you guys have decided yet if it's on 2 lots or 3 lots. If it's 1 and 3 or 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, it's, I think the question you have to decide is who, if the deed restriction, well, which lots does this restriction apply to? And then, I think related to that is, other than the city, who gets a say on whether the deed restriction gets removed?
Oh,
Now, chances are the answers to both of those questions are probably the same, but
Well, it sounds like so my intent in the motion is that the deed restriction would apply to lots 1 and 3, because those are in essence new lots, and 2 is being reconfigured, but 2 is largely staying the same. And then,
so then
You-
would
you
it
would-
also be just 1 and 3 then that would decide whether those deed restrictions can be removed?
yes,
Okay.
And the city,
and the city.
and the city.
In city.
Yep.
Okay.
The
any-
motion is subject to adequate
Yep.
recording, conditional on adequate recording
Yep.
to the satisfaction of the attorney.
Any further questions now on this motion?
Is this also placed on the CSM? Can we
Kind of go back and forth, don't they, about whether there's
So I think we'd prefer to do a separate document,
Yeah.
because if you want to change it, like if you want to release it, then
Right.
theoretically you have to do another CSM.
Right.
That's my preference.
I think that's a good idea. That's kind of
Yeah.
We don't want to do another CSM unless there's an annexation.
Correct.
Yes, my question does come back to this 1 and 3 or 1, 2, and 3. My question is, if the intent with having them, the 1 and 3, connected in some shared decision-making, doesn't it make sense to have all 3 of them?
One, two, and 3?
Well, yeah, no, I mean, I can see it both ways, like, because you have the existing home, but yet by the same token, 2 is kind of right in the middle of the 2.
Yeah.
And 2, even though the house is existing, it's still having its lot reconfigured and is part of this. So, I mean, this is, I think, within the discretion of the Plan Commission, but I mean, I think, I think it makes sense to include 2, but I understand not wanting to too. So it's really,
And we're fine with the inclusion of 2. I mean, we don't object to that. I think we just don't want there to be any confusion that what exists on 2 now is okay, which I think it would be fine under the code anyway. We wouldn't want to get into trouble as to whether we're limiting what 2 currently has. But I think we can even address that in the restriction. So it's really your call. Whatever you want on
I
that
mean,
issue is fine with
my view
us.
would be that satisfaction of recording of a deed restriction to the city attorney's perspective and in benefit of the city, but the lots that it applies to should be up to the trust, not to us. The current trust holder of the land.
I think we're open to either option. I mean, what we had proposed was 1 and 3, simply because we were trying to keep it clean with respect to developed versus undeveloped. That was what we had proposed.
That's why I was leaning towards 1 to 3.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only reason why two, the compelling case for including 2 is just because it's right
It's
in the
proximity.
middle of the 2, and it's certainly gonna be the most affected if 1 or 3 decide to change, to try to change use.
Yeah.
And so giving all 3 lots reciprocal authority over each other,
I actually
That-
agree
that's
with
fine
you.
with me.
That makes sense, because the whole thing started with that path, dividing that lot number 1.
I'll
So-
amend my motion
it's all
to
Lot 2's fault.
to
and they
include
don't
lot
get
2.
Okay,
driveway.
yes,
I'll second it.
okay.
Okay, any further discussion now?
Hopefully this is the last time this is before us.
Okay, all those
Although you
in
bill by the hour,
favor of
so.
the motion.
I have other things to do, so.
Do we want the motion to be read again, or you are all okay?
Thank you.
Okay, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, motion passes.
Great, thank
unanimous.
you very much.
Okay, it's past 7:30. So I'm going to open the public hearing
I was just looking at the
Yeah.
time, sorry.
for the proposed zoning ordinance amendment to permit structures taller than 35 feet in the R1 and R2 zoning district with conditional use permit. Anybody who wants to speak either in favor or against it?
Hi, my name is Sarah Kortz. I live at 6714 Franklin Avenue. I'm here simply to ask questions tonight about the proposed changes to R1 and R2 zoning ordinances. I would like to start by saying that everyone I've asked these questions has already been very forthright and tried to answer them completely, including the mayor, city staff, and my alder, Katie Nelson. When I first heard of this change, it was presented as being primarily for the high school. This is one of my first questions because parts of the high school are already over 35 feet high, namely the 2001 addition. So my first question is, whatever was done in 2001, can we just do that again since it doesn't seem to come up that often? This change to 2 zoning classes seems a bit, to me, like using a sledgehammer to a problem that mainly just needs a nudge once in a while. So that was my first question. My second question was about making this change to R1 and R2. I understand these conditional uses are already in place. That's fine. But it seems like this is the single-family and condo or duplex housing is the housing that is currently squeezed in Middleton, particularly on the starter or affordable end. And I wonder if this won't cause more stress on that class, especially when you look around town and you see other zoning classes along University in particular, along any of your major transit corridors where there's actually better public transit for higher conditional uses like this, higher nursing homes, higher rest homes. It seems like people who staff those and family visiting would prefer to be on a transit corridor like University or Parment or any of these places rather than in the more residential neighborhoods. So those were 2 of my main questions. Mainly, I just wanted to know a little bit more about the rationale behind this proposed change. Thank you.
So, Matt, could you answer those now, or? Or do
Well, in
we-
terms of the 2001, I was around, I guess, but I don't remember what happened.
I
or-
didn't look, we have so many files.
Yeah.
Was it a variance?
I think it was, but that's what we talked about there. That's one of the choices, but a variance requires a
Oh,
hardship.
yeah, yeah, I don't know, did we give a variance? Is that the way
I
we?
think it was, I just didn't have time.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly say, I don't see, it doesn't seem like that's really an appropriate instance for a variance. Not saying that that's not how it was done, but this really should be more of a condition, because it's, what is the hardship, I guess? It doesn't really seem to fit neatly into the traditional analysis. I'd prefer to see more of the conditional use permit situation, so, you know, you can attach other conditions if you think appropriate. I mean, what this sets is just the baseline standard that you have to meet to even be allowed to be considered. That does not mean that there aren't other conditions that, as you might go along and look at. So that would answer that question. And then Eileen also, and I'd also talked further about the current draft that you've got before you. I see it would allow just about any use to receive a conditional use permit to exceed this height, but
This isn't the document, it has been revised, and I thought it was, the revised one was put in the packet, so.
yeah, this isn't.
Yeah, the revised one limits
as we
limits
go
it
on.
only to schools and churches and.
Right, that's what I'm, that's
the
not what
public-
I'm,
but
that's
the
not what
public-
I'm looking at.
I
The
don't
public
know why-
hearing notice did not.
It did not, and that's why we were getting.
Oh, that's
one
okay,
page.
that's what I was looking, I was
Up one
looking at
page.
the public
I'm so
hearing
sorry,
notice one. There we go.
This is the ordinance, oh, right there.
Right.
Correct.
I don't know
And
why
so
this-
what we
Structures for
talked about, and kind of in
schools.
anticipation of some of these concerns about maybe other uses that would go, as I did do a draft here that further narrows the universe of properties that might get this, and so you'll see in the draft that, the alternate draft that's in the packet here is that would, just for schools, churches, rest homes, or nursing homes. So, you know, you couldn't do a house or some kind of multifamily condominium type development that would have more than 35 feet. It would only be for those uses, and if you meet the distance requirements, those are the thresholds for even being considered for this 35-foot addition. So, you know, it may very well be that 2001's the last time we had something built over 35 feet, and, you know, might be another, you know,
Yeah.
15, 20 years before we have to do it again. So, but I do think that the conditional use permit is the more technically appropriate tool to deal with this rather than a variance.
And just to try, again, to try to address the concerns that were raised by several people, that's why I started talking to Matt to say maybe we should limit it. There isn't, multifamily's not allowed in a R1 or R2, so it couldn't be used for that, and I don't foresee us ever adding multifamily. That wouldn't make sense to do it as a conditional use, it's a rezoning. So the uses, these are probably the most likely uses to ever need a height thing, but it is still by conditional use. So the other choice would be to rezone the high school to planned development district, and,
So is there a problem with that?
well, it's something that could be done, but this is, again, it's only conferring the potential for these conditional uses, schools, churches, rest homes, and nursing homes, to go above 35 feet on a conditional use basis. So it's pretty narrow.
So could we find out that what happened in 2001, and we could use the same thing?
Well, I'm assuming it was a variance. I didn't look it up, but the variance doesn't make sense because you have to show a hardship. In this case, these conditional uses are things that we've said, they belong in an R1 and an R2 under certain conditions, the conditional use process. So that's why, again, and you could do a planned development district, but then you're taking all the high school and making it a planned development district instead of, we allow and encourage schools to be in an R1 district. So this just encourages them to have some height under these conditions with at least 100 feet separating it.
So what would it take to find out what happened in,
Well, we can review the files, but
Okay.
if it's a variance.
I mean, based on what our regulations say and what the current zoning is, it either got totally overlooked or a variance was issued, and in either instance, those
It's not
probably
correct.
aren't, I would
Right.
say, I would call those, you know, mistakes of the past. Not that the outcome wasn't acceptable, but,
I like that.
if it was a variance that.
Not a hardship.
To do it, but it probably was not the best tool. I hope it was a variance rather than it just being entirely overlooked. But as I said, either one, I don't think is an option that is as good as formally approving it under a conditional use permit.
So this, again, this can't be used in a multifamily situation, it's not.
Right.
Because that's not a conditional use, and it wouldn't be, it would have to be that would be a rezoning to a totally different category.
Anybody else wants to speak? Anybody else wants to speak? Okay, I'm gonna close that part of the public hearing. So I think, in this case, it probably is not a bad idea to find out what we did at that time. So there's no urgency that why we have to prove it tonight, right? Or-
I just don't see why that would influence the
Yeah, I
decision.
think it seems
Because-
irrelevant.
Because it
Yeah.
either it was overlooked or it was a variance, which we're saying is not a good way to.
Well, and Eileen can certainly brief, because we're just recommending approval or disapproval to
Council.
council, and then there can be a briefing, because council approves all ordinance changes.
Eileen, when the ordinance says structures for schools, we know that these are structures already in place, so high school, elementary school, middle school. Does it, I guess my question is again about, could it be a different type of school, or these are already things that are existing?
It wouldn't necessarily have to be existing, it could be a new one, but then that would be a conditional use within an R1 or
But
R2.
Okay.
the term school, the term church, the term rest home or nursing home, those are already.
Defined in R1.
The actual, those are the
Yeah.
conditional uses in the R1, so those terms already exist within our
Right,
code. yeah.
okay, thank you.
So what is the height of the Cranberry Middle School?
I don't know. I don't know.
Okay, we go to item number 6, so this is item number 7.
Did
So-
you close the public hearing?
He did
Yeah, I
it
did
at
close the public
7:49,
hearing, yes.
2 minutes ago.
I missed that.
So item number 6, proposed zoning ordinance amendment regarding an ordinance relating to time period for approval of specific implementation plan.
I think, I thought we already, I'm sorry.
No, we had the public
you
hearing
did.
on it,
I'm
we haven't
sorry.
voted
I'm
on it,
sorry.
yeah.
I'm okay. I'm fine. Sorry.
Okay, so we had a public hearing on that part, but we need to prove
I'm
it.
okay.
Yeah.
Move to recommend approval to the council.
Second.
Okay, any question or comments? It's just a housekeeping thing. So all those in favor of this motion say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So the motion passes. Now we are on to item number 7,
Got it.
proposed zoning ordinance amendment to permit structures taller than 35 feet in the R1 and R2 zoning district with a conditional use permit.
And I'll recommend approval to the, what is it, to the zoning? No,
To the common council.
Thank you.
Second?
Okay, so now the discussion.
I'm glad that the draft ordinance has schools, churches, rest homes, nursing homes. I think it's important to think about how Wisconsin's conditional use permit law changed as of 2017, because, and the statutes are a little confusing because there's kind of what we would call preconditions. If you meet these, then the city shall issue the permit. And then there's what I call post-conditions, which is, but you can still subject it to conditions that further the intent of the ordinance. So the reason I'm a little concerned about this is that the only precondition is that you have to be 100 feet from any area. So what this would suggest is, if you have a school, church, resting home, and nursing home that is 100 feet from any R1 zone with these 100 feet setback, then that's the only condition. Then state law would require us that we shall issue that height, that conditional use as a height, but we can subject it to other conditions. But it basically, it's, Matt is disagreeing with my interpretation.
Well, I may or may not be, I mean, that's why I have in sub 14 there, it says, in addition to the considerations under section 10.115. 10.115 is our general conditional use, I forget what we have. I mean, it's still pretty broad
Yeah.
sort of language, but, I mean, I think that this still does encompass other, legitimate, public health, welfare type of things that we could identify applicable to a specific project and allow us to fashion other conditions. Now, of course, we, would have to specifically identify what those are and
Have to be
what
based
our
on
concerns
substantial
are.
evidence.
But that's no different than any other conditional use. These are just, as you indicated, additional, very specific preconditions that have to be met. And if you meet those, there might be other project-specific conditions that, depending on the potential impacts that are identified, may call for other conditions to be imposed.
So is there any urgency in approving this?
No, I mean, the school is coming in this fall, so you can, it's time to decide if you wanted to add language. I was just trying to get it done before I left.
Well, one question on that, so would those things be things like setbacks that are listed in the R1 dimensional standards?
Well, the setback, they would still, all this, when you have a conditional use approved in the R1, you still have all the setback standards that, those automatically continue to apply. Here, we have an additional setback that essentially, whatever the part of the building that is 35 feet, that has to be at least 100 feet away, any other, area. So essentially, wherever there's a building envelope on another property that's R1, it would have to be 100 feet away from it, not 100 feet away from the actual structure, but 100 feet away from whatever envelope defines where a structure could be built. So for instance, let's say you've got a house and, well, it's the front yard setback is whatever it is, and they meet the front yard setback by 10 feet. Well, then it's 100 feet plus that additional 10 feet. It's that wherever something can be built, that's where this is measured to.
Well,
Can I suggest a friendly amendment
Sure.
to the ordinance? At least 100 feet from an area in an R1 zone property within which a principal, P-A-L,
Oh, that's good.
structure may
thanks
be
for
built.
spelling.
Sorry. We have to keep up our principles.
Yeah. I must have typed this one myself.
Sorry, I just noticed that.
I didn't even notice it.
well, my big concern is that, number one, we don't have the urgency. Number two is that, let's find out what did happen at Middleton High School. Number three, what is Cromery? Is it already about 35 feet? What did we do there if it is? So I think we need to do some homework. So I'm going to pose it on that basis, but, it's up to you, so.
Would you prefer that the high school come in as a planned development district? I mean, that's another option, but again, there's just,
No?
Like that creates just unnecessary work, doesn't it?
yeah, it does.
And just as a comment for the public, any conditional use permit now requires a public hearing, a Class 2 notice, so there'd be
Yeah,
opportunity for neighbors to comment.
absolutely.
Okay, any other question or comments? All those in favor of the motion to approve, say aye.
To recommend approval
Okay,
Oh, okay.
to the council.
Recommend
recommend
approval
to
to the common council,
the zoning
with
ordinance.
Amendment, yeah.
the amendment.
Well, that's, I think, correcting a spelling, that's
It's not an
not,
amendment.
not really, that's
But you said within a principal structure, oh, you already.
Principal
something that
structure.
could
Yeah,
have been
it's changing
suggested to
from
be outside
LE
of
to-
Poconos.
But not.
But would you repeat the motion?
Okay.
Sorry, man.
Okay.
Go ahead, Aline, repeat it. So.
Okay, moved by Hubbard, seconded by Murray, to recommend approval to the common council, with,
With no, just recommend approval.
Yep, just
Recommend
recommend
Okay,
approval.
so you were not adding another precondition?
No.
No,
That's right.
we were just changing
Yeah.
the spellings.
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
Okay, all those in favor of this motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Aye.
okay, so,
Well, we are done with the agenda. Anything else?
we have pie tacos.
Okay.
Is
Well,
this your last meeting?
this is actually
This is
Aline.
Eileen's last meeting.
So Aline has done a phenomenal job for 31 years.
Not saying anything
And,
else.
you know, we're going to have a more celebration a little bit later, but let's give her a big hand, congratulations. Yes, yes.
31 years, and she started when she was 15.
Well, now I need a motion to adjourn. So,
Second.
okay, we are adjourned.